Let's go. Threats in this position are knight takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, queen takes queen. Checks in puzzle position are knight to e7, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight takes pawn, check. Pawn takes knight. Rook to g1. Next, the threats are pawn takes pawn, queen takes bishop, knight takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is queen takes bishop, queen takes queen, rook takes queen. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are bishop takes pawn, queen takes pawn, check. Checks in puzzle position are queen takes pawn, check. The answer is bishop takes pawn, knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight. Another puzzle. Here are the threats. Queen takes queen, bishop takes pawn, rook takes rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using rook takes rook, queen takes queen, rook takes queen. One more. The threats are there are no threats in this position. The checks are rook to e2, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook to e2, check. King to f1. King to e3. Rook to e5, check. King to d2. One more. Threats in this position are bishop takes pawn, rook takes pawn, queen takes pawn, check. Checks in this position are queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook to h7. Queen to f6, check. Rook to g7. Knight to g5. Let's continue. Threats in puzzle position are queen takes knight, check. The checks are knight to g3, check. d3, check. Queen to f1, check. Queen takes knight, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight to g3, check. Rook takes knight. Pawn takes rook. Another puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn, queen takes bishop. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. e4. Bishop takes pawn, queen takes rook. One more. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are bishop takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is bishop takes pawn, check. King to d6. Bishop takes rook. Next puzzle. The threats are pawn takes knight, bishop takes pawn, knight takes bishop, knight takes pawn, knight takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Knight to e2, check. Knight to b3, check. The answer is knight takes bishop, knight to b7, check. Knight takes bishop. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are bishop takes bishop. The checks are knight to c4, check. Knight to f5, check. Rook to d1, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook to d1, check. Bishop to d5. c4. One more. Threats in this position are bishop takes knight, queen takes pawn takes bishop. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Bishop takes knight, queen takes bishop, f6. Queen to e3. Pawn takes bishop. Queen takes queen, check. Bishop takes queen. One more. Here are the threats. Rook takes bishop. There are no checks in this position. The answer is rook takes bishop. Rook takes knight. King to e7. Rook to g4. Rook to c4. One more. The threats are rook takes pawn. Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook. Queen takes rook. There are no checks in this position. The answer is rook takes rook. Rook takes queen. Rook takes queen. Next, the threats are queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The checks are queen takes rook, check. Queen to d8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen takes rook, check. King to f7. Queen to f8, checkmate. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes bishop. Here are the checks. Rook to d1, check. Rook to e1, check. The answer is rook to e1, check. King to f2. Knight to d3, checkmate. Next puzzle, here are the threats. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Bishop to a6, check. Queen to b7, check. Queen to a8, check. The best move in puzzle position is bishop to a6, check. King to b8. Queen to b7, checkmate. Next, threats in puzzle position are pawn takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. f5, check. The best move in puzzle position is pawn takes pawn. King to f7. h5. d5, check. Pawn takes pawn. g3. King to f3. Let's continue. The threats are bishop takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is bishop takes knight. Next, threats in this position are knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Bishop to g6, check. Rook to h7, check. The answer is rook to h7, check. Rook to g7. Rook takes rook, check. King takes rook. Knight to e8, check. King to f7. Knight takes bishop, check. Another one. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is knight takes pawn. Next, threats in puzzle position are pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes knight. Knight takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Queen takes bishop. Checks in this position are knight to e7, check. Knight to f6, check. Solution to the puzzle is knight to e7, check. King to g7. Knight takes queen. One more. The threats are rook takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes queen. The checks are rook takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is queen to e5. Rook to e8. Queen to g5, check. One more. Here are threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. King to d4. Knight to e3. Bishop to b4. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop. Pawn takes bishop. The checks are queen to b8, check. Queen to e8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is queen to b8, check. Queen to c8. Queen takes queen, checkmate. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.